we always tend to do. We look at free agency, and as I mentioned, free agency technically starts on March 13th, but there's this window from the 11th to the 13th where deals can be made. Teams can talk to players. They don't really go into full effect with the new league year, though, until March 13th. So it was very interesting because some thought with some of the moves that were made. We talked about the cuts last week with Quandre Diggs, Jamal Adams, Will Dissly, Brian Monet was cut. Freed up a good amount of cap space. Some players had restructured their contracts. We talked about Geno Smith. We've talked about Tyler Lockett. Opening up more cap space. So you say, oh, Seattle's going to go out and start going to spend some money, maybe bring in some of the former Ravens that Mike McDonald had coached on their Baltimore defense, a guy like Patrick Queen, Geno Stone. There was a lot of optimism going into free agency, we'll say, with Seattle and this upcoming class, and that didn't necessarily materialize. Seattle really hasn't signed a big name free agent, largely going into a few of the players that were their type priority, which we'll talk about here in a second. And we'll start with the returning names, actually. We'll do that. And not necessarily talking about that top priority just yet, but we'll start with kind of a fun one as the team went and brought back offensive tackle George Fant. Now, if you remember Fant, he came into the league as a project. He had played college basketball primarily during his time at university and only played 2 football games during his time before the NFL, came into the league undrafted. He went with Seattle. They liked his progression, and he has been in the NFL ever since. He didn't stay with Seattle as full time. Last year, he was with the Texans on a 1-year deal. He's now 31 years old. He signs a 2-year deal with Seattle. He'll largely provide a backup position for the team at the tackle spots, whether it's, Abe Lucas missing 11 games last year and Seattle rotating guys like Jake Curran, Stone Forsythe, and Jason Peters at that position, trying to find some consistency through 11 games. They weren't able to do that. Last year, he played primarily on the right side for the Texans, registering 833 snaps there, ranking 35th among qualifying offensive tackles at either left or right in pass block win rate. So, yeah, it's nothing really more than an insurance there at the tackle position. Again, he broke into the NFL as an undrafted rookie with Seattle back in 2016, playing extensively on both sides of the offensive line, so he really could continue to fill that swing tackle role. So it'll be really interesting to see what the details of his contract are. He last played, as I mentioned, on that 1-year deal. It was a $3 million deal with the Texans, $800,000 of that guaranteed. It would be interesting. I don't doubt that it's something similar to that deal that Seattle signed him to, considering if he's going to be a swing tackle for them. But it's nice for them to be able to get some reliability there at the depth position for the tackle spot, mainly because if we look back to some comments made previously by former coach Pete Carroll, at one point he referred to Abe Lucas's knee injury as chronic, which implies it may not be completely behind him, even though he did have right knee surgery earlier this current offseason. So you're kind of wondering what the deal might be there. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the depth pieces that Seattle had in terms of offensive line would be back, including Stone Forsythe, who's going to be on the last year of his rookie deal. Guys like Raekwon O'Neal, McClendon Curtis as well, who came back as exclusive rights free agents to close up things at the offensive tackle position. The other big one was the big one was Leonard Williams. There was a lot of concern to see if he would come back or not. Seattle had traded a second-round pick for him. Notably, he's a big deal just because of that, because of the impact he made. He wasn't, playing the defensive line, it's not a glamorous position. You're not going to get a lot of highlights or big notice. But Williams played a solid role with Seattle. Both Carroll liked him when he was here. John Schneider has said he liked him and stated early into this offseason he was definitely a priority. And they're able to sign him to a 3-year, $64.5 million deal with $43.85 million of that guaranteed. So, they gave up a second-round pick to get him from the Giants, who also got a 2025 fifth-rounder, and also uniquely paid most of the remaining $10 million that he was owed for this past season. Losing him in free agency would have been a pretty big waste, and you'd be losing another key front seven player. Seattle's lost more than a few of those key front seven players in the last few years of free agency, but that will not be the case. He helps join that group with guys like Dre'Mont Jones, Jaron Reed, Uchenna Nwosu, who's going to come back from injury, Boye Mafe, to kind of help solidify that D-line and the outside linebacker position. So it'll be a lot of fun to look at that, see what Mike McDonald's defense can work on with that D-line and those outside linebackers. But the inside linebacker position is one they're going to have to work with. We'll address the players lost via free agency here in a minute once we get to who they've signed already. So, no, it's nice for them to look at that. You don't see too much in terms of the risk. Seattle's liked what they've seen from him. There is the risk of the 3-year deal, the length of it, considering his age. He does turn 30 in June. He played in 10 games with Seattle. So it'll be interesting to see. He didn't transform their run defense a bunch, so maybe you could pick at that. But they do feel great considering that he was able to play 18 games throughout the course of the year. Yes, 18, because of the fact that he played out the Giants season with them and ahead of the trade deadline, and then played the rest of the year with the Seahawks. So he played 18 games in total. It's only been done, I think, once ever in NFL history. So really nice to see Williams join that list, and gives you some good feelings about his reliability going forward. So we look at some other things with returning names here. This one I didn't really expect for Artie Burns to come back, but the team brought back cornerback Artie Burns. He was largely a depth piece. After some of the bigger deals with Williams and Noah Fant, who we'll get to in a second. It's a 1-year deal for Artie Burns. He's been a solid depth piece the last 2 years and a veteran voice amongst a really young cornerback room. He did step in a few times throughout the course of the year to play nickelback, so we'll see there. He didn't really play nickelback previously in his career, so it was kind of a tough spot to put him in. He had to step up, when Devin Witherspoon had to deal with injuries here and there. Tariq Woolen got benched at points throughout the course of the year. Seattle generally tried to deal with their defensive issues as well. And with Devon Witherspoon coming back and hopefully good to go for the entirety of the 2024 season, Burns likely plays more of a depth role. It is a 1-year minimum salary. He played on that last year. Seattle didn't have to give him any guaranteed money, and his cap charge was less than $1 million. So it'll be interesting to see what deal he's brought it back on, but I don't doubt it's something that is much bigger than that. He'll be fighting for his own roster spot. He'll be a depth piece. He's going to have, you look at the cornerback room. I mentioned Devon Witherspoon, Tariq Woolen. Trey Brown is also a young cornerback there as well. Maybe Michael Jackson, who played the last few years with Seattle as well, depending what happens with him. So we look at a few of the other names. The team did bring back Darrell Taylor on a 1-year deal. So instead of tendering him as a restricted rights free agent for $3.1 million, they signed him to a slightly better 1-year deal. On top of a non-guaranteed $3.136 million base salary, he gets a $20,000 signing bonus and the ability to earn an additional $350,000 in sack incentives. So, Darrell Taylor's shown flashes here. He's not necessarily a strong run defender, which has kind of cost him his starting job since 2022. But he's been valuable as a situational edge rusher, something that Seattle really hasn't been able to get, for a few years now. So there's that with Darrell Taylor. We'll look here at Noah Fant. He was a guy that I was wondering about when he signed the deal before the season as his contract was coming up. He signed a 2-year, $20 million contract with a $9 million signing bonus. He will likely need to be featured considering that he got paid a decent amount and they really didn't do that much at all last year. He was a first-round pick back in 2019 by the Broncos, obviously acquired in the Russell Wilson trade. With this free agency happening and a few names moving on, he is the only player that was a part of that trade that is still with the team. He caught 32 of 43 targets for 414 yards and no touchdowns in 2023. Part of it, along with Seattle's inability to keep drives moving forward and, the struggles along the offensive line, was that he also, Seattle really rolled with that trio of Kobe Parkinson and Will Dissly at the tight end position. Both of those guys are gone. Again, we'll look at the players lost via free agency here in a minute. They're looking at Fant to become more of a focal point in that offense, and it'll be fun to see what Ryan Grubb is able to do with him. It's going to look, he gets a little bit of a raise here. It's a big contract for him who really hasn't produced that much. So you're really looking to focalize him in this offense and make that money worth it, so to say. So it's a lot of what we look at with returning players. There's a few new names for the Seahawks to look at, and I almost moved on to them, but we're going to do that now. Most recently, actually, the team signed linebacker Jerome Baker to a one-year, $7 million deal, bringing him over from the Miami Dolphins. He helps replace Bobby Wagner and Jordan Brooks, who have gone elsewhere. He essentially replaces Jordan Brooks, who went to the Dolphins on a 3-year deal, in the middle of that defense that will look different in terms of personnel and scheme under head coach Mike Macdonald. The Dolphins released Jerome Baker with a failed physical designation before they signed Jordan Brooks. He's a year older than Brooks at 27, is coming off of a pair of injuries, so there's some concern there. He has been a solid playmaker over Brooks, recording 5 career interceptions to Brooks is just 1, and 22.5 sacks to Brooks is 6.5. He won't count against Seattle's formula for compensatory picks because he was released by Miami. It's interesting to see what he's able to do coming off those pair of injuries. He missed 4 games last year with an MCL injury, then dislocated his wrist in his first game back from that, which required surgery and sidelined him for Miami's playoff game against the Kansas City Chiefs. Besides that, and the fact that Seattle really needs to continue to add depth at the inside linebacker position, there's some concern. The other inside linebacker that they signed came from the same division that Baker was coming from, Terrell Dodson. Dodson played last year with the Bills, signed a 1-year deal with the Seahawks. So there you replace Bobby Wagner and Jordan Brooks with Jerome Baker and Terrell Dodson. It's going to be interesting to see. They're both 1-year deals, so Seattle doesn't seem to be looking like they're committed to these guys for the long term. I imagine personally they're going to go through the draft and develop some guys and raise them up, and Mike Macdonald can mold those guys into his linebackers of the future. But it's interesting. Dodson came into the league in 2019 as a free agent, undrafted. Really came into a starting role last year and posted career highs in tackles at 74, sacks at 2.5, and tackles for loss at 8. He's a 6-foot, 237-pound linebacker with 4.6 40 speed. He looks like he can add some strong speed to the middle of that defense, which, the team has kind of need since Bobby Wagner was younger. So it'll be interesting to see the money side of the Dodson deal. He's not as established. There was concern with that, especially when you lose guys like Wagner and Brooks who have established themselves here with Seattle. He was primarily a backup before making his 10 starts last year. In 2019, he served a 6-game NFL suspension after his girlfriend accused him of becoming violent with her during an argument. He was arrested on charges of domestic violence and disorderly conduct. He denied the charges and reached a deal, pleading guilty to misdemeanor disorderly conduct. The Bills themselves said their investigation did not find any signs of domestic violence and noted that Dodson had no previous legal issues. So if you want to look at the risk, there it is. It'll be really interesting to see how that plays out and how we get to know Mr. Dodson as well. Moving on with some of the new names, adding to the tight end room, which the team will still need to do so after losing 2 tight ends via free agency in Disley and Parkinson. The team pairs former Oregon Duck Farrell Brown along with Noah Brent. He signs a 1-year, $3.2 million base deal with a maximum value of $3.9 million. So he was actually their first outside addition of free agency, which was very unique. Felt like an overpay maybe. They bring him in after Parkinson leaves and Disley leaves, so they at least need another tight end to add there. Brown's interesting. He's a 29-year-old. He caught 13 passes for a career-high 208 yards and 1 touchdown last season with the New England Patriots. He scored 3 touchdowns across 7 seasons since entering the NFL as an undrafted free agent. He's likely to fall into a depth role as the 3rd tight end on the depth chart, and he's more of a blocking tight end. So expect him to see and run fits and stuff like that. The first outside edition of free agency didn't excite a lot of people, largely because of the lack of production, the lack of a big name, and the fact that he's likely just going to be a run blocker and the 3rd tight end on this depth chart. He did play 209 special team snaps last year for New England, the 8th most on the Patriots, so he could have value there after the Seahawks did cut special teams captain and linebacker And fullback Nick Bellore, Brown played in 17 games last year and 16 back in 2022, so there's no real concern about his durability, which is nice. Continuing and looking to areas where the Seahawks were filling in after they lost players, the team signed safety Rayshawn Jenkins to a 2-year, $12 million deal. So after cutting Diggs and Adams, you bring in Jenkins. He gives them an option to start opposite of Julian Love, or maybe play alongside him if they decide to play in 3 safety packages. Whatever that is, Jenkins has 5 years of NFL experience, starting experience that is, and 10 career interceptions, including 5 over his last 2 years. He's not quite the ball hawk that Quandre Diggs was, or the sort of blitzer that Adams was before his injury, but he is a bit cheaper than both of them, and that's nice, obviously, for Seattle. He won't count against their compensatory picks because he was cut by the Jaguars earlier in the month of March. He isn't necessarily a better player than Quandre Diggs, at least for me, who played at a Pro Bowl level lately in the last 4 years and picked off 15 passes in that span, and he didn't miss a game either. This is telling you I would have rather kept Quandre Diggs. But the Seattle seems to think that Jenkins will be a better value, if nothing else. His deal is similar to the one that the team gave Julian Love last March, including a $6.6 million this season, which is $11 million less than Quandre Diggs was going to be owed in the final year of his deal. Cutting Diggs, though, does mean that Seattle is taking on $10.26 million in dead money. So depending on how they structure this Jenkins deal, that swap will save Seattle around $7 million in cap space, as well as $4.4 million in cash for this upcoming season, albeit for a player who's a little bit less accomplished and only 1 year younger than Diggs. So there was that. With Jenkins, we move on to the last outside addition, and it's a fun one because he's a former Husky. The team signed offensive lineman Nick Harris to a 1-year, $2.51 million deal with a maximum value of $3.26 million. There might be he might be the starting center for the team. I wouldn't doubt that they add some players in the area there via the draft. So, but it's fun. Evan Brown was there last year. Doesn't look like he's going to be back. Someone that will compete with last year's draft pick out of Michigan, Olu Oluwatimi, for the job. It's kind of similar to what Brown signed 12 months ago, both in terms of the fact that it's modest and because of his background. Harris played 281 career snaps at center, 154 at right guard. And even if he doesn't necessarily start at the center position or right guard, considering there's another player from the inside line that's gone, we'll talk about that again in a minute, he really could be valuable to back up, the interior line. He's much less experienced than Evan Brown, though. He's only made 4 career starts over 4 seasons with the Cleveland Browns, having missed the 2021-22 season, with a knee injury. He reunites with the O-line coach he played under at the University of Washington with Scott Huff, who was hired to the same role on Mike McDonald's staff. So all 3 of Seattle's interior offensive line starters from last year are free agents, and Damian Lewis has left, meaning Harris is the only start of a lot of retooling that's going to happen at the interior O-line. He was fine as a center last year for Cleveland. He's a bit younger at 25 years old and will cost Seattle about the same. So it'll be very unique to see if he's any better. He only started 3 games last year at center, including 2 last season at center, and started 3 games. He posted an excellent pass block rate at the center position, but that's not enough sample size to really say, if it's going to be sustainable or not. So it's going to be interesting to watch that position battle of him and Oluwatimi and maybe a draft pick in the interior line. We look over here on your screen to the players that the team lost via free agency. I've kind of talked about all of them so far. Both linebackers, Bobby Wagner has gone to the Washington Commanders to reunite with Dan Quinn, and he's also earning his doctorate at Howard, which is very cool. Just sucks to lose Bobby for a second time now. Jordan Brooks is off to join the Miami Dolphins, essentially the team swapping Jerome Baker and Jordan Brooks. Tight end Will Dissly, Uncle Will, goes to the LA Chargers, so unfortunate to lose another Husky. Offensive guard Damian Lewis goes to the Carolina Panthers, as mentioned. Tight end Kobe Parkinson went to the LA Rams, so the Seattle tight ends both went to LA, just to different teams. Running back DJ Dallas, a fan favorite, went to the Arizona Cardinals, so he stays in the division. Backup quarterback Drew Lock went to the New York Giants. Initially, it was reported that he was going to battle with Daniel Jones for the starter position, but that does not appear to be true, at least per Drew Lock's comments. Linebacker Devin Bush, who really didn't get that much playing time, goes to the Cleveland Browns, and offensive tackle Jake Curran goes to the Chicago Bears. So to wrap up all of that, as we've talked about all of those players and the players that have left, it seems a lot to me, and at least to a lot of the folks that covered this Seahawks team, that this is a year, it's a transitional year. Mike Macdonald and John Schneider are going to reconstruct this team. They're probably going to bring in a lot of young talent through the course of the draft. I wouldn't be surprised to see a few more personnel moves ahead of the draft, or maybe even during it, after it. But I don't expect to compete for a Super Bowl this year, unfortunately. And that's fine. I mean, with McDonald signed to the contract that he is, you want to build the team right. You want to build it for the future. You want to win consistently. You don't want to bank it all for one chance at a Super Bowl. So I get it. It'll be really fun to see who the team drafts and look at them and see them develop. I imagine the team will draft a few linebackers, inside linebackers at least. Oh, yes. And there was the trade, for Sam Howell. So the team did acquire Sam Howell via trade from the Washington Commanders. And normally this is where I would have gone and said, hey, Seattle might draft a quarterback, considering that they've got the mid-first round pick. And there was the thought that they'd reunite Michael Penix Jr. with Ryan Grubb, which I would have loved personally. And it still can happen, technically. But the team did this past week acquire Sam Howell via trade with the Washington Commanders. So Howell comes to Seattle. Oops, I might have lost it here. There it is. Yeah. So back on Thursday, back on the 14th, Seattle received Howell and a 4th-round pick in this year's draft, plus a 6th-rounder in exchange for a 3rd-round pick and a 5th-round pick. So the 3rd-round pick that Seattle gives up is their own pick, and the 5th-rounder that they gave up, they have another pick in the 3rd round thanks to the one that the Denver Broncos gave them in the Russell Wilson trade. So Seattle replaces Locke with Sam Howell, which I don't mind. I mean, Sam Howell's a good thrower of the football. He's made some mistakes. We saw how good he could be when the Commanders came here to play the Seahawks and barely lost to Seattle on a field goal. But I kind of would have rather drafted a quarterback. But I guess Schneider and the front office liked what they saw in Howell. They liked what they could get him for, and that's where we are. So that wraps up our Seahawks section of the show. It's a fine start, but again, it really looks like this upcoming year for the team will be a transition more than anything else. So